Hercule Poirot and the music box that played only. Blood Chapter 1. The Last Note at Villa Blanche. The storm erupted with sudden violence on the Normandy coast. Thunder tore through the sky like warnings of fate, and the sea roared against the cliffs with uncontrollable fury. Villa Blanche, an elegant neoclassical mansion, stood defiantly facing the ocean, its windows trembling under the onslaught of the wind. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Madeleine Desrosiers, matriarch of one of the oldest families in the region, lay dead in her study, her body slumped beside the mahogany dressing table, an expression of surprise, almost bewilderment, still fixed on her face. What was most disconcerting was not the absence of blood, nor the stillness of the room, but an unusual detail. The porcelain music box on the desk, a German relic that Madeleine never allowed to be played, turned slowly, emitting a sweet but melancholy melody. The Lorelei. The music stopped just as Miss Claire Desrosiers, her niece and heiress, entered, soaked from running from the greenhouse, where she had been arguing heatedly with her aunt less than an hour earlier. Her piercing scream alerted the staff, and within minutes the entire house was engulfed in orderly chaos. Doors closed, telephones off the hook, and nerves as taut as violin strings. Dr. Fournier, the town doctor, confirmed the death as natural until proven otherwise. But something didn't add up. The music box never sounded alone. The next morning, a short figure dressed in an impeccable trench coat, a bowler hat, and a perfectly waxed moustache stepped off the train at the Étretat station. His gait was measured, almost dancing. Walking beside him was Commissioner Roland Marchand, a seasoned man with a direct character and little sympathy for the artistic. "Monsieur Poirot," Marchand grunted, glancing at the detective's tiny suitcase. "I can't understand why they've called you. There's no sign of violence, no poison, nothing." "Ah, but exactly, my dear Marchand," replied Poirot with a smile as sharp as his Belgian accent. "When there are no signs physical, one must look for the signs psychological. What do you say about a music box that plays without anyone turning it on?" Marchand snorted. "Are you going to solve the case with melodies and poetry?" "With my little grey cells, monsieur, and perhaps with a musical beat." At Villa Blanche, Poirot's arrival caused a muted stir. Miss Claire, with her dark hair and tense expression, greeted him with a mixture of relief and annoyance. She was a haughty young woman, accustomed to dominating every situation. But something in Poirot's gaze seemed to unsettle her. "Do you want to see the crime scene, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, leading him toward the study. "With pleasure, but first—" Poirot stopped in front of the piano in the main hall. "Who used to play this piano?" "My aunt, years ago. Then me, from time to time." "Oh, and the music box, does it have any special mechanism?" "It's a wind-up, a unique piece brought from Leipzig. But no one knew how to activate it. My aunt considered it sacred." "And yet it rang?" Claire nodded stiffly. "Just when I found it, it was playing." Then it stopped. Poirot inclined his head. His eyes scanned the living room, the closed piano. The clock stopped at 11:07, and the fallen vase next to the mantelpiece. "Miss Desrosiers," he said lightly, "who was in the house last night?" My cousin Henri, his wife Juliette, the housekeeper, Madame Lenoir, and the gardener Luc. Everyone was asleep. I was in the greenhouse, alone. And was there any argument with your aunt? Is that relevant? Everything is relevant, mademoiselle, said Poirot, especially when a melody rings in the blood. As Poirot walked through the studio where Madeleine's was found, his attention was not on the music box, nor on the body that had already been removed. He observed the objects on the table, an unsigned letter, a glass without lipstick marks, and a piece of music lying open on the piano stand in the corner. The title, Last Breath. Last Breath. Marchand, murmured Poirot, tell me, don't you find it curious that the melody should sound just as the lady is dying, but the spring is not worn out? What do you mean? Poirot straightened, his expression almost satisfied. That maybe the box didn't ring by accident. Maybe it was activated with intention, and if someone knew how to do it. He did it not to make death more pleasant, but to announce it. The case, Poirot thought, had already begun to sound like a symphony. A symphony where each suspect played his own note, but only one had composed the final melody. The question was, who had the original score? Chapter 2. Echoes Under the Melody. Breakfast at Villa Blanche was a carefully choreographed scene of forced politeness. The long table, adorned with crockery that looked like it hadn't been used in years, was occupied by tense, silent faces. Claire Desrosiers cut her croissant without tasting it, her gaze fixed on the rim of her cup. Henri, her cousin with thinning hair and a sweaty forehead, flipped through a newspaper without really reading it. Juliette, his wife, maintained a neutral smile, like an actress without an audience. Madame Lenoir, the housekeeper, served tea without looking up. Poirot, for his part, ate calmly, watching each person's movements as if they were notes on a score. "What was your relationship with your aunt like, Monsieur Henri?" Poirot asked, spreading butter on his toast. Henri started slightly. "Good, I'd say. Cordial. There were never any arguments. Interesting. And you, Madame Juliette?" The woman crossed her legs elegantly. Madeleine was complicated. She had very strong opinions, but she was always kind to me, although she didn't entirely approve of our marriage. She said Henri needed a more practical woman. "And your inheritance, how is it distributed?" "Excuse me?" Claire intervened, her tone more abrupt than she intended. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "It's a practical detail, mademoiselle. Feelings are often hidden behind bank accounts. Did you know if Madame Desrosiers had recently changed her will?" A silence spread through the room. "My aunt was reserved about her decisions," Claire said coldly. "But from what I understand, her estate was divided evenly between Henri and me. She didn't believe in favoritism. And the music box? Who knew how to make it play? No one, Juliette replied quickly. "It was always locked. It was more decorative than functional." Poirot nodded with apparent indifference, but his eyes shone. "And yet it rang at the exact time the lady died." After breakfast, Poirot asked to tour the gardens. Luc, the gardener, accompanied him. He was a man with a sunburnt face, a shifty gaze, and a rough manner. "Were you here last night, Monsieur Luc?" "In my cabin. I finished the greenhouse maintenance late. Miss Claire was there too." "Until what time?" around 10:30. Then I went back to the cabin. Did you hear the music box?" Luke stopped. "No, but the wind was strong. Anything could have sounded, and I wouldn't have heard it." Poirot noticed the boot prints on the gravel path, still fresh from the previous night's rain. "Are these yours?" "Yes, I went to check the rose bushes this morning." Poirot didn't reply. He stroked a damp rose leaf and glanced at a window in the east wing. "Does that window overlook the studio?" "That's how it is." "Funny, because last night someone looked through it, from outside." Luke paled for a moment, but quickly recovered. "Maybe it was a cat." "Perhaps," said Poirot without conviction. Back inside, Poirot asked to see the deceased's belongings. Claire led him to her aunt's private dressing room. There, everything was symmetrical. The hats lined up, the perfumes arranged by height, the books in alphabetical order. Disorder, Poirot thought, would have been more revealing. However, a small cardboard box at the back of the wardrobe caught his attention. Inside were old letters tied with a maroon ribbon. As he sifted through them, Poirot noticed something peculiar. They were all addressed to Emilien, a name never mentioned by the family. "Who is Emilien?" Claire frowned. "I've never heard of him." Poirot took one of the letters and read it silently. Then he smiled faintly. "He who forgets a shared song never deserved it," it says here. "A song? Yes, and I wonder if that song was the last thing Mrs. de Rosier heard." Shortly after, Poirot locked himself in the study with the music box. He watched the mechanism for long minutes, barely touching its gears, sniffing its wood. "There's no dust in the shaft," he murmured. "Someone activated it recently, and it wasn't an accident." Then he turned his gaze to the closed piano. He gently opened it and played a single note, do sharp, the same note that began the snare drum melody. A musical code, he said to himself, or perhaps a message. When evening fell, Poirot discreetly summoned Commissioner Marchand. "My friend, we need to know two things. Who is Emilien, and if the score last breathed was composed by someone close to this house? Because I'm convinced that that music was a signature, not a coincidence." Marchand looked at him in disbelief. "Are you implying that the music box was a kind of letter of introduction?" "Exactly. And every time it rings, it brings us closer not to the culprit, but to the heart of the matter." Chapter 3. The Ghost of Emilien. The wind had died down, but a dense atmosphere still lingered in Villeblanche, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Poirot, sitting in an armchair in the drawing-room, leafed through Emilien's letters once more. Each one bore a date between 1899 and 1904, signed with initials E.B., and all written in the same sepia ink, in a handwriting from another era. "That night under the wisteria, your laughter still resonates," he read in a low voice with a thoughtful expression. Miss Claire appeared in the doorway, visibly paler than in the morning. "Have you discovered anything, monsieur?" "Poirot?" "Rather, I have remembered something. An old song from her youth. Did your aunt have any friends from before her marriage?" Claire shook her head. "She didn't talk about her youth, nor about her husband, except to say that he died too soon." And yet Poirot held up the letter. "There is passion, reproach, and an absence that never closed. Claire approached cautiously. "Do you think that person, Emilien, could have been here?" Poirot smiled softly at him. "Mademoiselle, sometimes ghosts don't walk around the house, but live in it. This Emilien was important. More than that, he was a secret. And secrets aren't filed away without consequences." Meanwhile, Commissioner Marchand had gone to the town hall to search for records. When he returned that afternoon, his expression was less sceptical than usual. Emilien Benoit, pianist, born in Rouen, registered in Étretat during the years before the Great War, never married, but he held up a yellowed sheet of paper. He was arrested in 1904 for contempt during a scandal at the local church. Apparently, there was a dispute with Madeleine de Rosier's then fiancée. Poirot rubbed his moustache. And the fiancé? André Lemoine, naval officer. He married Madeleine a month after the incident. And there you have it, a triangle, out a scandal, a wound that never healed. But tell me, Marchand, are there any registered descendants of Benoit? Marchand denied. Nothing. As if he had vanished. Poirot stood up. So we must consider the possibility that it wasn't him who disappeared, but his legacy. Juliet was in the library, leafing through a fashion magazine, when Poirot interrupted her. "Excuse me, madam, but you have a musical ear, don't you?" "I play a little piano, yes." "Why do you ask? Does this tune sound familiar?" Poirot sat down at the piano and played the first few bars of De Lorelei. Juliet frowned, then her eyes lit up. "Yes, I heard it recently. In this house?" "When exactly?" "I think it was a few days ago." Claire was humming it. Poirot didn't react immediately. He closed the piano and thanked them with a slight bow. "Very kind, madame." Night fell with a strange calm. Claire stepped out into the garden, wrapped in a woolen shawl, and found Poirot waiting for her by the fountain. "Is it true that you hummed the music box song?" Claire tensed. "Who told you?" "It's not important. What's important is why he knew it. Didn't he say no one knew how to make it sound?" "That's right, but—" He hesitated for a second. "I heard it ringing alone one night, months ago. I was in the hallway, and the box played a fragment. It seemed familiar. I don't know how to explain it. It stuck with me." "Didn't you mention it to your aunt?" "No. She would have scolded me for snooping. She always guarded that box like it was sacred." Poirot took a step closer. "Mademoiselle, did you know Emilien Benoit?" Claire's face went completely pale. She tried to hide it with indignation. "How? Of course not. Are you sure? Yes, I've never heard of it." Poirot lowered his gaze and nodded, as if jotting down one more contradiction in his invisible notebook. Returning to the study, Poirot found Madame Lenoir examining a cracked vase. "Do you want something, Monsieur Poirot?" Just a sincere answer. "You've served in this house for decades. Did you ever know anyone named Emilien?" The woman hesitated for only a second. "No, sir." Poirot approached the desk. "Not even when the lady locked herself away to write those letters?" Madame Lenoir looked at him cautiously, lowering her voice. "She never sent those letters. She wrote them and then put them away, as if she expected him to come for them some day. Do you think he did it? I don't know. But once, many years ago, I saw a young man leave a white rose on the garden wall. She found it at dawn and didn't say a word. Poirot walked silently to his room. An unsigned letter, a forgotten song, a music box that only played with blood, and a love buried beneath decades of silence. But now, it seemed, someone was willing to dig it up. Chapter 4. The Hand That Didn't Play the Piano. The next morning, Poirot woke up with a fixed idea in his head. As he dressed carefully, perfectly ironed trousers, a fitted waistcoat, and a sky-blue handkerchief in his breast pocket, he muttered to himself, the melody was not just an ornament, it was memory, an echo, and echoes are repeated only if someone makes them resonate. When he came down, he found Commissioner Marchand in the lobby, visibly upset. "I don't like this case, Poirot. There's no proven crime, no obvious motive. Just a music box, unsent letters, and speculation." Poirot smiled. "My friend, don't you see that's precisely what makes it fascinating? The crime isn't in the bloodshed, it's in the hidden intention, and that, believe me, is much harder to erase." In the living room, Claire was leafing through a family photo album, though she didn't seem to see any pictures. Noticing Poirot, she slammed the book shut. "Have you discovered anything else?" "Maybe, but I don't have enough pieces yet. I need to hear the music box one more time." "Do you think you'll find a clue in the melody?" "Not so much in the melody as in the rhythm with which it is activated. Could you accompany me?" They went together to the study. Poirot placed the box on the desk, carefully observing the small key on the side. He turned it delicately. The lid opened, and it began to jingle. The Lorelei. Claire shuddered. "It's exactly how I remember it. And doesn't it seem strange to you that, for someone like your aunt, obsessed with order, she never bothered to hide it?" Claire frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot pointed to an irregular notch in the bottom of the box, barely visible beneath the padded cloth. "This, mademoiselle, is not part of the design. It is a modification. Someone altered the mechanism so that it would activate when the lid was opened without having to turn the key. A hidden trigger. And if that box was closed, as you claim, so someone opened it before me. Exactly." Claire leaned against the desk, stunned. "And what does that mean?" Poirot looked at her gently. "That Madeleine de Rosier was not alone when she died." That same afternoon, Poirot asked to gather all the inhabitants of the house in the living room. Henri presented himself with an anxious expression, Juliette, with a studiedly nonchalant air, Madame Lenoir with severe silence, and Luc, the gardener, with hands dirty with dry earth. "My friends," said Poirot, standing by the extinguished fireplace, "allow me an observation. In grand old houses like this, secrets don't disappear. They hide in the walls, in objects, even in songs. And this crime, because yes, it is a crime, is linked not only to the death of a woman, but to the resurrection of something far more dangerous, the past." Everyone remained silent. I discovered that the music box was tampered with, that someone wanted it to play at exactly the right moment. Why? To cover up a noise? To mark a precise time? Or simply as a signature of an act of twisted justice? Henri raised an eyebrow. "Are you implying that someone murdered my aunt? With a melody?" "With intention, sir. And what better disguise for a crime than something beautiful? An object everyone considers innocent. But there's no music that doesn't reveal the soul of the person playing it. Poirot dropped a letter on the table, one of Emilien's. Who knew this man? No one spoke, until Juliette sighed. I saw his name once, on an old piece of sheet music. It was on the piano, months ago. Composition by Emilien Benoit. I thought he was an unknown composer. Why didn't you mention it before? I didn't think it was relevant. The score disappeared later. Claire took it. Everyone turned to Claire. Her expression was stony. I found it. I kept it. It was signed, with the same initials as the letters. I thought it was someone important to her. Did you think Orc knew? I didn't know anything. She raised her voice. My aunt didn't talk about him. Poirot approached slowly. And yet you hummed your music. Because, mademoiselle, you're the one who possesses his hearing. Claire looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? That she might not be your niece? Or at least, not on Madeleine's husband's side. Are you sure her father was André Lemoine? Claire hesitated. Why do you ask that? Because the town records don't list any daughters he acknowledged. Only Madeleine, born in 1905 in Paris during an extended rest stay. And you know who was also living in Paris that year? The silence was absolute. Emilien Benoit. That night, Poirot retired early. Before going to sleep, he wrote a sentence in his travel notebook. The past doesn't kill you, but those who deny it can. And although he still couldn't pinpoint the killer with certainty, the truth was getting closer. I just needed to hear one more note. Chapter 5. The Voice That Never Signed a Song. The next morning, the sky over Étretat dawned overcast, as if sharing the invisible burden falling on Villa Blanche. Poirot descended to the dining room with his usual impeccable gait. But anyone who watched him closely, and few did, would have noticed a shadow of unusual intensity in his eyes. The coffee was steaming in his cup when Commissioner Marchand entered triumphantly with an envelope in his hand. A clue, Poirot. The parish archives had this, a baptismal document dated March 14th, 1905. Madeleine Desrosiers, single mother. Father not registered. Poirot took the paper carefully. Claire. Yes, she was never André Lemoine's daughter. So it's confirmed, Poirot murmured. Claire is the illegitimate daughter of Emilien Benoit, and Madeleine concealed that truth all her life. And do you think that has anything to do with his death? Poirot didn't reply immediately. His fingers tapped softly against the porcelain. What we hide in love sometimes reappears in anger, and nothing leaves a more dangerous mark than a stolen identity. In the greenhouse, Claire stood among the orchids, lost in thoughts that seemed unwilling to let go. Poirot approached her with the same gentleness with which a pianist caresses the keys before a delicate note. Did you know that your mother went to Paris to hide an unwanted pregnancy? Claire stared at him. Are you still talking to me as a detective, or as a man? As someone who values the truth, mademoiselle, you deserve to know who you are. She turned around, visibly tense. And that changes anything, Monsieur Poirot. That my father wasn't an honourable naval officer, but a melancholic pianist who died in oblivion. The motive changes? And perhaps the victim. The victim, Poirot nodded. Your mother spent her life protecting a lie you began to uncover on your own, right? First with the melody, then with the signed score. And when you confronted her, Claire looked down. He didn't want to talk about the past. He just said that there are truths that shouldn't be opened, like certain boxes. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, like the music box. Shortly after, Poirot went up to the attic. No one accompanied him this time. There, among dusty trunks and forgotten shelves, he found what he was looking for, a rectangular wooden box marked with a faded label. Scores Benoit. Inside, pages with handwritten notes, dedications and a notebook with the title songs for Clara. No Claire. Clara, Poirot murmured. On the first page, Emilien had written, To my daughter, whose voice I don't yet know, but whom my music will always seek out. Poirot sat down on the trunk and slowly closed the notebook. The blood that had made the music box ring was inherited. Meeting again with the commissioner, Poirot shared his discovery. Madeleine feared the truth would destroy the legacy she had created for Claire. But someone else, someone who also knew that truth, acted before it became public. Marchand raised his eyebrow. Are you saying it wasn't a crime of greed, but of reputation? Maybe it was both. Do you suspect Claire? Poirot denied. She has the emotional motive, yes, but not theme thought. Someone manipulated the box with mechanical precision. That requires knowledge, patience, tools, and who has access to all of that? Marchand frowned. Luc, Poirot did not reply immediately. It's a possibility, but not the only one. As evening fell, Poirot asked to see the piano in the drawing-room again. This time he opened it completely. Inside the string compartment he found something unusual, a small antique key wrapped in red velvet. Beside it, a note on thin paper, unsigned and undated. Silence is also a form of forgiveness. Poirot closed the piano with great care. It wasn't an impulsive murder, he said quietly. It was a coda, the closure of a melody that had been playing silently for decades. That night, Claire received an anonymous letter slipped under her door. It read just one sentence, written in perfect handwriting. Listen to the music, and you'll know who couldn't stop hearing it. Claire trembled, because she, like Poirot, was beginning to understand. The melody of the Loreleyite was not just a funeral ornament, it was confession. Chapter 6. The mechanism beneath the silence. The next day, an almost artificial calm enveloped Villa Blanche. The faces were the same, the routines barely changed, but an invisible tension hung in the air, like the last chord of a symphony suspended in the air, unresolved. Poirot walked down the central corridor, pausing before each painting, each piece of furniture, as if each object had something to declare. The anonymous envelope Claire had received hadn't been shared with anyone else. But that morning, Claire herself wore a different expression, not one of fear, but of determination. Marchand, Poirot said in a low voice as they approached the study, the culprit has made a mistake. Small, almost invisible, but fatal. Which, he tried to control a melody, as if one could manipulate an emotion without consequences. But music, my friend, doesn't obey those who don't fully understand it. In the study, Poirot examined the music box again. Wearing white gloves, he carefully unscrewed the porcelain base, revealing the inner mechanism. Not only did he find a recent modification, a tiny cam had been positioned to be activated by light pressure on the side. It was delicate, almost watchmaking work. And next to the axis of the piece, engraved barely visible in the metal, he found initials. L.M., murmured Poirot, and Emilien, and Claire, Luc Morel. The gardener was discreetly summoned by Marchand. He entered reluctantly, his boots marking the flagstones with dried mud. "Do you know anything about musical mechanisms, Monsieur Morel?" Luc narrowed his eyes. "A little. I repair tools, hinges, locks. Sometimes I'm asked for fine-tuning. And the lady's music box?" Poirot persisted. "Did she ever play it?" Luc stirred. "No, nobody touched her." Poirot took a small magnifying glass from his pocket and showed him a photograph of the disassembled mechanism, with the initials enlarged. "Can you explain to me why your initials are inside the spring?" Luc swallowed. He looked down. But instead of shaking his head, he murmured, "I just fixed it. I didn't know that." "Ah," interrupted Poirot, "but he did know, because to fit that cam, he had to dismantle the entire drum, and you don't do that without activating the melody. You—" He heard her, Monsieur Morel, and he recognized something. It was the same song Claire was humming. "I thought that she was Benoit's daughter." Luc looked up, torn between fear and pain. "I found the scores in the attic years ago. One night, while I was fixing a leak, I saw the name, the dates, and the music. It was the same music Claire sometimes played without knowing why." Poirot looked at the magnifying glass. "What did you do with that knowledge?" Luc didn't answer. "Did you share it with Madeleine?" "She already knew," he whispered. "She asked me never to mention it, to leave it alone. But then I saw Claire starting to get suspicious. The music, the box, the letter." "Which letter?" "One. I handed over without knowing it. It was for Claire, but it was sealed. I didn't know what it said until later." Juliet at that moment entered unexpectedly. "What's going on here?" Poirot turned to her calmly. "You knew about the inheritance, right? You knew that if Claire wasn't a legitimate daughter, she could challenge the will." Juliet blinked. "That's absurd. Everything's fine." "Maybe. But the sheet music signed by Benoit disappeared. And then he hinted that Claire was humming a song that had never been recorded. How did he know?" Juliet didn't reply. Her gaze went from Poirot to Luc, then to Marchand. Poirot stepped forward. The real crime wasn't tampering with a music box. It was using music as a threat. Someone, fearing the truth would come out, wanted to carry out a preemptive strike, but not a bloody one. Control? And what better way to control someone than to make them think they've inherited a curse? Claire, who had been listening from the doorway, then entered with an envelope in her hand. "This. I found it in the piano. It has no address." Poirot took it. Upon opening it, he recognized the same handwriting as the unsigned note. This time, it simply read, "The music was meant to be put away," but she insisted on letting it go. Madame Desrosiers knew Claire would discover everything, Poirot said quietly, and someone, fearing that this discovery would destabilize more than just a legacy, chose to silence her forever. That evening, Poirot returned to his room without naming the culprit. But he was determined. At the next meeting, he would reveal the whole truth, because in this case, the culprit had not made a mistake by murdering, but by trying to play a melody that didn't belong to him. Chapter 7. The Broken Compass. At dawn, a peculiar silence enveloped Villeblanche. It was not the natural tranquillity of the countryside, but a heavy, tense silence, as if the walls were retaining the last echoes of an unspoken cry. Hercule Poirot, now fully dressed and combed as if it were midday instead of 6 in the morning, walked down the corridor towards the study with a clear objective: to confirm what His Malgré Cels they had already hinted to him. When he opened the door, he found what he expected. The piano, closed the night before, was open again, and on the music stand a score, not just any score, but the score Last Breath, signed by Emilien Benoit. The same one Juliette had claimed Claire had kept. The same one, according to Luc, had disappeared years ago. Poirot took it carefully. It was untouched, except for a new note in pencil, written in an uncertain hand. It's time for someone to listen to what they didn't want to hear. Mademoiselle Claire, said Poirot, finding her in the drawing-room a little later. Do you recognize this piece? Claire looked at the score slowly, then nodded. Yes, it's the one I found in the attic, the one my aunt forbade me to touch. She called it A Coward's Goodbye. Poirot tilted his head. Interesting choice of words. But tell me, do you touched her ever? Claire hesitated. Only once. It was instinctive. I didn't know who it was or why it felt so familiar. Until you told me about Emilien. And what did you feel? A deep sadness, but also relief, as if something buried deep inside me had awakened. Poirot looked at her tenderly. Music has that ability, mademoiselle. It unearths truths without words. And that's why. Someone in this house wanted to bury it again, but they made a mistake. They wanted to do it too late. Inspector Marchand was summoned again. This time Poirot took him to Madeleine Desrosiers' private wing, where, according to his intuition, there were still undisclosed secrets. At the back of the wardrobe, after moving several wide-brimmed hats and boxes of gloves, Poirot found a small wooden box with a simple lock. He forced it open with a tool on his walking stick. Inside, an old copy of the original will, and a second, more recent document. In it, Madeleine transferred the entire property, not just half, to Claire. Dated 3 weeks before her death. There you have it, said Poirot, showing it to Marchand. That's the real reason. Did anyone else know? We don't know, but I suspect so. Someone who had access to his things and is afraid of losing everything. Later, Poirot asked to speak with Juliette alone. The woman entered the library with an air of perfect composure, although her fingers fiddled with her wedding ring like nervous keys. Madame Juliette, do you remember saying that you never played the music? Bach's? Sure, why would I? Poirot sat down opposite her. Because you knew what it meant. You knew the tune, and not because Claire hummed it, but because you'd heard it before. That's absurd, really. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Because, according to the gardener, you found the score when he forgot it on the workshop table. And when Madeleine learned it had reappeared, she was furious. Juliet did not respond. Poirot continued in a soft voice. You knew Claire was beginning to discover the truth. And you also knew that if Madeleine publicly confirmed that Claire was the illegitimate daughter of Émilien Benoit, her share of the inheritance could disappear. Not because Claire wouldn't inherit, but because the house itself would become a symbol of a larger truth, a new line, a new family name, and you, madame, hate to be displaced. Juliet stood up abruptly. You have no proof, not yet. But let me ask you, what were you doing the night before Madeleine died, while everyone was asleep? I slept too, with Henri. Would you swear, Juliet? Hesitated. He doesn't sleep soundly. Can you confirm? May I? Because so far, your husband has avoided answering any direct questions. Later, Poirot met privately with Henri de Rosiers. Monsieur, do you know why your wife married you? Henri became uncomfortable. Because we loved each other, I guess. Or because you were the key to this house. Henri turned pale. Are you implying that Juliet... I'm saying that music wasn't what she hated. It was what she feared, because it meant everything would change. And Juliet, she's a woman who doesn't tolerate uncontrolled change. Henri closed his eyes and murmured. She told me Madeleine was ill, that she wouldn't live long, that the house would be ours. But when I found out about the new will, I didn't know what to do. And then I didn't say anything. I chickened out. Poirot nodded calmly. I understand, but cowardice isn't a crime. Manipulation and murder are. That evening, Poirot lit a candle on his desk. He opened his notebook and wrote, didn't kill to silence a melody. She killed because she knew she couldn't compose another one of her own. And the next day he would summon them all. Because the symphony of crime was about to end. There was just one chord missing. Chapter 8. The Note That Wasn't Written. The morning at Villa Blanche was deceptively calm. The sun shone on the hanging bougainvillea. The servants spoke in low voices, and the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread permeated the dining room. But within that harmonious facade, an invisible turmoil stirred. Poirot remained in the music room, the place where almost everything had begun, and, if his intuition was correct, where it would also end. The piano, the music stand, the music box. They were more than mere objects. They were actors, silent but eloquent. The detective looked closely at the score of Last Breath. When Claire walked in, she was wearing a dark blue dress, sober, as if it had foreshadowed the gravity of the day. You gathered everyone at the house this morning, didn't you? Poirot nodded politely. Yes, mademoiselle. The moment of truth is approaching, and truths must be sung in unison, as in a fugue. And you already know everything. I know enough, she replied with a faint smile. But there's one last note that has yet to be played, and for that I need you to tell me the truth, not as a witness, but as a daughter. Claire tensed. I knew it all just a few hours ago. The letters, the sheet music. The lyrics to that song I felt was mine without ever having learned it. It was like recognizing my own voice for the first time. Poirot nodded with a hint of sympathy. Sometimes the deepest bonds don't require blood, but in her case there is. Emilien's blood, and that frightened many. Claire looked down. "Do you think Juliet killed my aunt?" "I think your aunt made an error in judgment. She thought it was enough to protect her with silence. She didn't. Imagine that silence would be used against her." Claire bit her lower lip. What if I hadn't discovered the truth? Would they have let her die in peace? Poirot looked at her with unusual seriousness. Maybe so. But it's also possible that she was already doomed from the moment she signed the new will. At 11 o'clock sharp, all the members of the household gathered in the living room as if attending an intimate applause-free concert. Poirot, standing by the piano, looked more like a conductor than a detective. "My lords and ladies," he began, "what happened in this house was not just any crime. It was a tragic coda, the last note of a symphony woven with secrets, pride, and fear. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock, keeping a beat that everyone seemed to have forgotten to hear." Poirot extended the score to the group. This piece, composed by Emilien Benoit, was written for her daughter, Claire, an emotional testament, a wordless confession. And that was what Madeleine wanted to hide, that her daughter was the fruit of a love that society would not have forgiven. Juliet crossed her arms, haughty. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Poirot conceded. "But yes, it did leave traces. You were the one who first suggested the melody. You took the sheet music from the workshop when Luc forgot it, and you were the one who tampered with the music box, or at least the one who gave the order to do so." "That's false. I never touched that box." Poirot did not interrupt her. He just turned and pressed a key on the piano, Ado sharp, the same note that opened the Lorelei. "Do you know what's funny, Madame Juliet? You said you recognized the tune because Claire hummed it, but Claire only played it once, secretly. Luc confirmed it, which means you already knew it before, perhaps because you were part of the group that decided when it should ring." Henri, who had been silent until then, spoke for the first time. "Juliet, you told me Madeleine was sick, that it was a matter of weeks. Was that true?" Juliet, for the first time, hesitated. "I didn't know for sure, but she was fragile, vulnerable. And you thought that if Claire discovered the truth, Madeleine would change her will again." Juliet didn't reply, but her face, white like the score on the music stand, was beginning to betray her. Poirot moved forward, slowly but steadily. What happened that night was a murder, disguised as an accident. The music box was rigged to play on its own, yes, but also as a distraction. While Claire was in the greenhouse, someone entered the study, confronted Madeleine, and probably threatened to reveal the truth before she could do so of her own volition. He looked directly at Juliet. She refused, and you, fearing that everything would fall apart, gave her a fast-acting poison, one that's undetectable after a few hours. "That's speculation!" Juliet shouted, taking a step back. "No, madam, it's deduction, because the bottle of digitalis that you turned to the medical pantry was found this morning, hidden in the back of his bedroom closet." Juliet's face contorted, not in surprise, but in defeat. "She was going to disinherit us," he murmured. "And all because of a song. Poirot approached. "Not for a song, madam, for a true, and you tried to silence her. But you see, music, like truth, always finds a way to sound." Juliet was escorted out by Marchand. The rest remained silent, digesting the invisible weight that had dominated the house for weeks. Claire, standing by the piano, wasn't crying, but something different shone in her eyes: recognition and freedom. Poirot came up, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said gently, "Now, mademoiselle, you may play that score. It is no longer a forbidden inheritance. It is yours." Chapter 9. The Melody That Remained Incomplete. The days following Juliet's arrest fell on Villa Blanche with a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The house seemed larger without her, as if the walls breathed with less tension. However, although the crime had been revealed and the culprit identified, Poirot still didn't consider the symphony complete. The detective remained in the house as a guest, not because he lacked accommodation in Étretat, but because something still seemed incomplete. He had solved the crime, yes, but not the soul of the crime, and that, for Poirot, was equally important. One afternoon, as the sea breeze blew through the study windows, Poirot watched Claire sitting at the piano. Her fingers moved silently over the keys, as if searching for a missing note in the air. "I can't touch the whole thing," he said suddenly, without turning around. "Last breath. Every time I get to the third page, something stops me. It's like it doesn't belong to me at all." Poirot, from his armchair, closed his eyes. "Perhaps because the score is not complete, mademoiselle." Claire turned around. "What do you mean?" Poirot stood up and walked over to Madeleine's desk. From a lower compartment, he took out an envelope sealed with red wax. "I found it hidden among old sheet music. It wasn't addressed, but it was signed with the initials E.B. I thought I'd give it to him after the storm subsided." Claire took it with trembling hands. She opened it carefully and unfolded a sheet of paper written in faint blue ink. "Clara, if this letter ever reaches you, you'll know who I am. I'm not looking for forgiveness or presents. I'm just looking for you to hear what I couldn't tell you. The melody I composed for you isn't complete. The last page was written by your mother, silently, unsigned, because even though I walked away, it was she who held you. If you ever doubt who you are, play the melody and fill in the last bar with your own voice. Your father, Emilien Benoit." Claire brought her hand to her mouth, tears in her eyes but not breaking. "The last page?" Poirot nodded. "It's on the back." Claire turned the page. There, in different, firmer, and neater handwriting, were 4 bars of music, 4 notes that concluded the melody with a long pause. "And a there major chord. My mother," Claire whispered. "She finished the song." Poirot murmured, "And you must be the one who touches it for the first time." That evening, under a soft rain that tapped the windows like a natural metronome, Claire sat down again at the piano. Poirot, Marchand, Luc, and even the stern Madame Lenoir were present. No one spoke. Only the crackling of the fire in the grate could be heard. Claire took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes were melancholic, floating with the fragility of a forgotten memory. But when he reached the third page where he usually paused, his fingers didn't tremble. He turned the page, placed the letter beside him, and played the final 4 bars. The music didn't end with drama or fanfare. It ended with acceptance, with forgiveness. A heavy silence followed the last chord, not out of discomfort, but out of reverence. Poirot broke the silence with a barely audible voice. A melody isn't always meant to be heard. Sometimes it's meant to be inherited. A few days later, Poirot was preparing to leave. Luc was helping carry his suitcase into the car when Claire caught up with him in the lobby. "Are you leaving without saying goodbye?" Poirot smiled. "Never, mademoiselle. I just wanted to leave without causing a fuss." Claire held out the score, already carefully bound. "Do you want to keep a copy?" Poirot shook his head with natural elegance. "No, no. This music has already found its home. You don't need any more proof of who you are. You have your name, your heritage, and now your melody too." Claire held the score against her chest. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, not only for solving the crime, but for helping me find myself." Poirot bowed slightly. "It's my pleasure, mademoiselle. Sometimes the mystery isn't who killed, but who lived with the truth in silence." And with that, he got into the car, leaving behind a different Villa Blanche. Not because of what had been lost, but because of what had finally been revealed, a story that no longer needed to be hidden between bars. Chapter 10. The Echo That Remained. Although Poirot had left Villa Blanche 3 days earlier, his presence was still felt in every corner. Calm had returned to the mansion, but it wasn't the same oppressive stillness as before. It was a different kind of silence, not filled with secrets but with resonances, like a room where a deep note has just been played and its echo lingers suspended in the air. Claire, now alone in the house, filled her days with deliberate slowness. She read her mother's letters one by one, as if rediscovering Madeleine in a new light. In the evenings, she sat at the piano not to practice, but to converse. She played small fragments, sometimes from Last Breath, sometimes his own inventions, and he felt that in each note there was an answer. But that morning he received an unexpected visitor. Luc Morel knocked timidly on the study door with his hat in his hands. "May I come in, mademoiselle?" Claire nodded with a soft smile. "Of course, Luc." The gardener entered with the natural clumsiness of someone who had never felt part of the interior of the house. "I just wanted to say thank you for not saying goodbye after everything that happened." Claire walked over and offered him a chair. "You didn't do anything wrong, Luc. You kept a secret that wasn't yours. You fixed things that others broke. And what I value most, you never saw me as just an inherited name." Luc looked down, visibly moved. "You were always Claire to me. Not Desrosiers, not Benoit. Claire. And that doesn't change. I know." Luc reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unadorned, light wooden box. "This, I found it weeks ago. I was going to give it to Madame Madeleine, but, well, I never knew if I should. It's her father's." Claire opened the box. Inside was an ivory pick engraved with the initials E.B. and a small key wrapped in velvet. "A key?" Luc nodded. I think it's from a hidden compartment in the old upright piano in the attic, the one no one used. Claire looked at him, intrigued. Why didn't you tell me before? I thought it would be better when it was all over, but now I think it's something that belongs to him. They went up to the attic. The piano was covered with a blanket, dust forming a thick film on the lid. Claire removed it, found a tiny keyhole just under the keyboard frame, and used the key. Inside, a wooden compartment contained an old envelope and a phonograph cylinder, wrapped in waxed paper. Claire opened it very carefully. Inside was a note written in faded ink. To my daughter, when you think you can't remember my voice, play this cylinder. It's not my legacy. It's my attempt. Emilien. Luc went to retrieve the phonograph, which was still dormant in the library. After wiping off the dust, they replaced the cylinder with trembling hands. The device creaked, turned, and then a warm, slightly trembling voice filled the room. Clara, if you're listening to this, it means you found what I couldn't give you in life. Sorry for the silence. I didn't know how to break it without breaking you. But this song was always yours. A brief silence followed, and then the melody last breath, played on the piano with trembling but sincere hands. The same piece Claire had grown to love without knowing why. But now, finally, she knew where it came from. When the recording ended, Claire didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and repeated softly, "Thanks, Dad." That night, Claire wrote a letter. It had no addressee. Or maybe it did, but didn't need to be sent. She left it on the main piano, next to the already bound sheet music. It read, "I'm no longer afraid of music. The melody is mine now." Not because I inherited it, but because I decided to touch it. Elsewhere in France, in his meticulously tidy apartment, Hercule Poirot opened a letter with no return address. It was a plain white envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Mr. Poirot, this is the final version of the score. I signed it with my full name for the first time. Thank you for reminding me that the truth doesn't need to hide behind a melody. Claire Benoit. Poirot smiled, placed the score on his desk and murmured, "Ah." Finally, harmony. Chapter 11. The last chord. Despite the peace that had settled over Villeblanche, not all the echoes had completely dissipated. Some, like the high notes that reverberate even when the piano has been closed, lingered in the most unexpected corners. Claire Benoit, for she now signed with her real surname, had settled into the house with a cultivated serenity. However, there was a discreet shadow that Poirot, even from a distance, had not failed to notice. One morning, almost a week after receiving the letter with the final score, Poirot received another, shorter letter. The handwriting was hurried and nervous. "Mr. Poirot, Luc has disappeared. He went out to get firewood and never came back. He didn't leave a note. All he found was his jacket on the tailgate. Something doesn't add up." Claire. Poirot wasted no time. That seemingly minor detail was out of place, and in the music of crime, dissonances were always preludes to deeper truths. He returned to Étretat late in the day, his hat held upright despite the wind. At Villeblanche, Claire greeted him with a grave expression. We searched the wooded area. Marchand sent 2 officers. Nothing. Luc vanished without a trace. Did you have any enemies? No, on the contrary. He was reserved, yes, but everyone respected him. And does this disappearance coincide with any other recent events? Claire hesitated. A couple of days ago. I got a call. They didn't say anything. They just put the music box next to the phone, and the melody started playing. I thought it was a joke, or maybe an illusion. But no, someone activated the same mechanism out of this house. Poirot frowned. So, there's someone else, someone who didn't want the melody to die with Juliet. Someone who still uses it. As a warning. That night, Poirot walked around the house, flashlight in hand. He wasn't looking for footprints, but for patterns. Houses, like people, have habits, and Villa Blanche, even with its mysteries solved, still held back details. In the library, he found a crack behind the philosophy bookshelf. He pressed the edge, and it turned slightly. A hidden chamber, not a secret room, but a gap between walls. Inside shelves filled with ancient documents, forbidden books, forgotten scores, and something else, a notebook. Untitled, Poirot opened it. The first few pages were in Madeleine's handwriting, but the next few were Juliet's. If she finds out the truth, she'll take everything from me. If Henri doesn't dare to act, I'll have to. And if Luc gets suspicious, I have ways to convince him to keep quiet. Poirot slowly closed the notebook. So, yeah, he knew everything from long before, and he acted before the first bar was played. But the most worrying thing wasn't the content, but a torn-out page at the end. Claire, said Poirot, returning to the drawing-room, did Luc ever tell you about a place he would escape to? Somewhere he would feel safe. Claire thought for a few seconds. The cabin on the cliff, an old shed. He restored it during the summers. He said it was his refuge, his silent score. Then we must go there. They climbed up with lanterns at the stroke of midnight. The sea roared below like an ancient beast. When they arrived, they saw light smoke rising from the cabin's chimney. Claire flung open the door. Luc was there, sitting on a blanket, with a wound on his forehead and his eyes lost. "Luc!" Claire exclaimed, running toward him. "What happened?" Luc barely whispered. "It wasn't just Juliet. Someone else. Someone who didn't want me to talk. They beat me. They left this." He held out a damp envelope. Poirot took it. Inside, a sheet of paper with just 3 words. "The music continues." Poirot calmly put the envelope away. "So, this isn't over yet." Back at the house, Poirot jotted one more line in his notebook. The crime was deeper than a murder, Shanted, was an entire orchestra, and we've only seen the first violin. While Claire was tending to Luc, Poirot closed the final score on the piano. He played a single note, an F sharp, and murmured, "A note that doesn't belong always announces that another melody is about to begin." Chapter 12. The Symphony of Truth. The next morning dawned clear, but in Poirot's heart the sky remained cloudy. The discovery of the hidden camera, the notebook containing partial confessions, and Luc's enforced disappearance confirmed what he had already feared. Juliette Desrosiers had not acted alone. There was a second baton in the orchestra of the crime, a silent presence that had remained in the shadows, even after her arrest. And now, with Luc back and injured, that shadow was closer than ever. Poirot gathered everyone in the music room, Claire, with a determined face, Luc, with a bandage over his eyebrow and his hands firmly folded, Madame Lenoir, rigid as ever, and finally Henri Desrosiers, nervous, with the face of a man who has been too close to a truth he cannot accept. Poirot stood by the closed piano, as he had so often. My friends, the time has come to close this melody, not with a final chord, but with the truth. Henri frowned. Right? Hasn't everything been resolved already? Wasn't it Juliet who... Ah, Monsieur Desrosiers, Poirot interrupted gently. Juliet was guilty, yes. She was the one who masterminded Madeleine's death, the one who feared that Claire would inherit the fortune alone and reveal her lineage. She tampered with the music box, used poison, hid the score, and yet even Juliet couldn't have done everything. Alone, everyone looked at each other. She needed someone with access to the medical store, Poirot continued. Someone who could move around the house without arousing suspicion. Someone who knew where Madeleine hid private documents. And above all, someone with something even more powerful than ambition. An emotional debt. Poirot turned his gaze towards Madame Lenoir. You, Madame, have served this house longer than anyone else, and you have done so with ironclad loyalty, but not to Claire, not even to Madeleine. The woman's eyes trembled slightly. My duty was to the lady, to her will, but when she decided to change her will for the last time, Poirot said sharply, you were alarmed, not by the money, but by what it implied, that the illegitimate daughter of a Bohemian pianist should inherit all, that the name Desrosiers would disappear. Claire raised her voice, hurt. So you helped Juliet, out of pride? Madame Lenoir looked away. I just put her in touch with someone. She wanted a quick solution. And I thought Madeleine had lost her mind. Poirot nodded. And that's how Juliet got access to the bottle of digitalis. You took it out. You locked the doors that night, so no one would see Juliet enter the studio, and then you thought it would all end there. Luc, in a hoarse voice, intervened, until they found the New Testament. Poirot turned to Henri. And you, sir, read it before anyone else, didn't you? Henri remained silent. Juliet showed it to me, he confessed. She told me I should destroy it, that Madeleine wasn't well, that it was all the madness of an aging woman. But I didn't. I didn't have the courage. I just walked away. And with that, said Poirot, he became an accomplice by omission. Claire stood up slowly. And all this, for what? To protect a name that was never clean? To prevent me from playing a melody that was always mine? Madame Lenoir spoke with a broken voice. Your mother lived in fear of what they would say, of what they would do. I just wanted her sacrifice not to be in vain. Poirot shook his head gently. But the real mistake was thinking that sacrifice meant renouncing the truth, when, in reality, it was silence that destroyed everything. Shortly after, Marchand arrived with his men, Madame Lenoir was arrested without resistance. Henri was released on bail, pending a statement. Luc returned to his garden, older in spirit, but freer. And Claire? Claire sat at the piano for the last time that week, not for practice, not to cry, but for close. He played last Brithentire, from the first note to the last 4 bars that now bore his signature. The melody no longer spoke of loss, but of understanding, of redemption. Poirot listened from the threshold, his hat in one hand, his walking stick in the other. When the last note fell like a drop of water into a full glass, he said softly, "The music has ended, but the echo will live on." Claire turned around with a calm smile. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." "Au contraire," he said, "thank you for touching what so many tried to silence." And with that, he left. Outside, the sea was gently lapping, as if keeping time with a final breeze.